Okay. So let's wait, and we start with 20. We have 70 registrations, and shall I start?
Yeah, I think you can.
Okay, so good afternoon and welcome to the 7th MDPI webinar on COVID-19. Today's topic, living with COVID-19, an early intervention therapeutic strategy to control the pandemic. We have the great honor and privilege to present Dr. Hamid Merchant. Hamid joined the University of Huddersfield in October 2013 and is currently working as a subject lead in pharmacy and course leader for the postgraduate pharmacy suite. He has a formulation sciences background with extensive experience both from industry and academia. He has a particular interest in drug delivery research at the interface of gastroenterology and publishes regularly in peer-reviewed journals. He is an overseas qualified and registered pharmacist. His clinical knowledge and expertise in pharmaceutics helps students to understand the clinical and therapeutic principles underpinning the science of dosage from design. The house rules today. Please post your questions only at the Q&A box. We will answer your questions at the end of Hamid's talk. If you are a researcher and interested to submit a paper in one of our journals, please get in touch with us. Hamid, the virtual floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. I would load my presentation now. Could you all see my screen?
Yes.
It's brilliant. So thank you very much for everyone who is here to listen to the talk and the invitation from the MDPI to give me an opportunity to present this strategy in front of you all. You all are aware of the pandemic situation. You are aware of the challenges the whole world and the healthcare systems are facing in COVID-19. So I don't go too much in the background detail, but you all are aware that the breakthrough drug is still not yet available. We haven't got any confirmed treatment to treat the coronavirus disease. The vaccines are promisingly going into the clinical phase. Some vaccines has made some early positive results in the clinical trials, but it seems like there are still few months to wait for the vaccine to go into the full commercial production. And by the time the vaccine will be available to the community setting, it would be many months from now. So we are looking at the disease progression. The lockdowns in many countries are easing out, particularly in the UK now. It's our first week probably to go out and relax some of the restrictions we had. And many experts and scientists are predicting a potential surge in numbers once the lockdown is out and maybe another kind of a pandemic curve to start. The disease progression and the number of deaths and fatalities we have is alarming. So the idea is that can we just wait for the vaccine, or do we have any alternative by the time we have a vaccination program to combat the disease and the challenge we are facing now? We all understand that the epicenter of COVID-19 is in your lungs. And the idea is if you could inhibit the virus to go down deeper into the lungs, you might be able to potentially prevent the disease pathogenesis and going into the severe form of the disease. You all are aware of the viral pneumonia it causes, and then the severe condition of the COVID, which is responsible for a lot of death within the disease. So the idea is to try to prevent this to happen, to combat the virus within the upper respiratory tract before it causes a severe disease. So if you look at the entry points for the virus, the most common entry point is through your nose, and which is where most of the patients would get the virus contracted into the nasal cavity. The first line of defense, if you like, on the nasal mucosa sometimes is not very good or prompt in these kind of viruses because of their nature. And the lag time and the delay allows the virus to grow further within the airways, within the upper respiratory tract before the immunity response kicked in. The virus makes its way from the nasal cavity to nasopharynx, which connects then to the oropharynx, to the back of the throat. In parallel, the virus could also enter through the oral cavity, and then it makes its way back to the oropharynx and joins the nasal cavity at the back of the throat. And then it goes further down to laryngopharynx, leading to your vocal cords and going down to windpipe or the esophagus afterwards. So that's the normal cycle. And the idea is if we could prevent the virus to go further down to the lungs, if we could tackle the virus within the upper respiratory system, there is a high probability that we could combat the disease. We could give the body time to develop immunity and antibodies against the virus, and it would be a natural defense. So we would kind of support the herd immunity concept, if you like, in the absence of a vaccine. Now, how we could do that, that is a concept being proposed as oropharyngeal sanitization. And what we suggested was to use the steam as a source of inhalation, where we could supplement the steam with some antimicrobial essential oils with known antimicrobial properties, and use this as a combination of some strong wide spectrum disinfectants in the oral cavity by using a throat rinse, and also using some selective anti-inflammatory drugs as a throat rinse to prevent the cytokine release syndrome, to prevent the body to go down to that severe stage of inflammation in the early on. And also use some combination antiseptics in a lozenge form, which could allow a complete sanitization of the oral and laryngopharynx mucosa down there into the airways. So the idea is if you could potentially combat the virus in the upper respiratory tract, you would give the body the time to fight off the disease naturally. And technically, from the clinical data we have from various hospitals across the world, we know that the virus takes a good 2 weeks to cause a severe disease. And many patients, overcome this naturally by their normal defenses in the body, but some patients do end up having a severe disease. In my opinion, I think one of the biggest mistake we did in UK was we left people in isolation for 14 days when they contracted the virus, or when they become COVID positive, and did not offer any aggressive therapeutic intervention and left them alone to combat the virus at home. The idea is if we could provide them the support during those 2 weeks, that could be very effective in reducing the burden on hospitals, in reducing the number of severe cases of COVID, and obviously reduce the number of deaths associated with it. So this particular concept has been published as a preprint version in Science Open as a full text article. So if you would like to look at the concept in more details or look at the references, you're welcome to do that. A treatment summary is also being published as a letter to editor in the British Medical Association's journal, the BMJ, and that's also available to look at online. There are a couple of references down on the slide if you wanted to have a look. So the idea is to look at inhalation as a route for antiviral vapors taken by steam, and using steam as an opportunity rather than a normal gas-based nebulization, because the steam could have a temperature which could also help with the heat attenuation of the virus. And then use throat rinse, taking some of the antiseptics off the shelf, which we already have approved in our pharmacy shelves, and using some selective anti-inflammatory drugs, again, to provide that anti-inflammatory effect from right at the beginning, to prevent the cytokine release syndrome to happen at the end. Use antiseptic lozenges, particularly combination antiseptics, which can be now taken further down the tract. Because some of the very strong ones cannot be taken orally, cannot be swallowed, if you like. They can be used within the oral cavity, but they cannot be swallowed. But the combination antiseptics used in lozenges can be swallowed, and they are safe to swallow, and they would provide coverage further down the laryngopharynx. And then provide some immunity support, for example, multivitamin mineral complex, particularly vitamin C and zinc, to support the immune system. So the idea is to provide this antiviral and antiseptic coverage from 3-4 different combination drugs to provide that strong synergism to combat the disease. And then some symptomatic relief and the bowel regulation, which might be interesting in some COVID patients where the GI symptoms are quite prominent. So the first thing, the steam. Steam provides a symptomatic relief in all respiratory tract infections and diseases, and this has been used as a treatment strategy for many years. Even before the invent of antibiotics, this was a common symptomatic relief for pneumonia, and it is quite safe. It's been used for several years, and not only it provides a symptomatic relief, the heat, the temperature in the steam also provide support to heat attenuate pathogens within the respiratory tract and allows the body to combat them more effectively. Steam is also known clinically to mobilize the mucus, and it helps with clearing the mucus within the respiratory tract, which is one of the ways of clearing the pathogens in the respiratory tract. So by mobilizing mucus, you could get the mucus excreted out, and you could help the virus to clear out easily. And you could also use steam as a medium, as a drug delivery source, to supplement it with by some vapors of antiviral drugs, which could further potentiate the effect of steam. The other advantage of the steam is it doesn't require a very expensive strategy to use. You could use it traditionally in a bowl of water with a towel across your head, like people would have used it in the past. You could use a bit more modern device like a facial steamer device, which is used in cosmetic and face cleansing purposes. It's quite a common piece of kit available in homes. You could use that device. So it's not something which is difficult to do. And the essential oils, which we already know have a wide range of antimicrobial properties. We've got quite a lot of in vitro data set to support their antiviral and antibacterial, antifungal properties, and before even COVID era. There are a lot of evidence published beforehand, and steam could allow the tiny vapors from this essential oils to go down to the upper respiratory tract and help with the attenuation of the virus there. It's very similar concept to like a nebulizer used in a clinic, but it's more effective because of its moisture and the temperature being used along. So in terms of the essential oils, there are plenty of literature available even pre-COVID, which talks about the activity of these essential oils against common pathogens. And you could dig down, there would be various natural oils and particularly the volatile essential oils, which are quite interesting in here. The most interesting reference here we have got is from May 2020, very recent in silico modeling study, where the researchers looked at the components of essential oils against SARS-CoV-2, and they tried to predict the target size of the virus with the constituents of the essential oils and how this could particularly find a strong affinity against the virus. So one piece of caution here, that normally it's perceived that anything which is herbal, which comes from the plant or the nature, is always safe. It's not true. We have got lots of toxins, and the poisons comes from the plant as well. So if it's from herbal sources, it's not necessarily mean that it's safe to use by inhalation. So what we have tried to do is come up with a list of recommendations which are quite safe from their historic use in the past within the inhalation route or the use by oral ingestion. Therefore, we have suggested these 6 particular oils which are quite safe to use by inhalation, and they have got some very strong in vitro evidence to suggest that the activity of these oils are very good against a wide range of pathogenic bacteria, the fungi, and also a range of viruses across the respiratory tract. The in vitro evidence is quite strong in the sense because it could be a very good predictor of the activity, local activity, or the mucosal response you could achieve by using these vapors. One of the question people have asked me previously when I was giving this talk in previous session, as to how would you source these oils, and one of the response I gave them in the past was looking at the vapor rub recipe. So vapor rub do not contain all the essential oils which I have recommended in my previous slide. However, it still contains 4 out of the 6 oils which we have recommended. A particular brand is called Wix, but it's not trying to promote a particular brand. It could be any brand available in your local setting. It could be any generic product. However, it's important to look at the constituents in the vapor recipe just to make sure that you have got the active constituents that we need for the treatment. The Vicks Vapor Rub is not something very new. People know it goes back more than 100 years. It was first developed by a pharmacist in North Carolina. And interestingly, if you look at the history of Vicks, it was the most common remedy used in 1918 after the First World War outbreak of Spanish flu. And it was very effective and it was widely used. At that time, people wasn't aware of the antiviral properties of the vapors they were inhaling through the Vicks. However, it was quite commonly perceived beneficial treatment in those days. But now, in 2020, we have got some scientific evidence to suggest that it's not just symptomatic relief. It also have got very interesting antimicrobial properties. And because it's been available as these essential oils are available as volatile oils, their boiling point is very, very low, which allows them to vaporize and take in by inhalation very easily, rather than using any other difficult technique. In some countries, interestingly, Vicks Vapor Shower tablets are also available. So these tablets contain same ingredient as the vapor of oil, but they are being presented in a tablet form, which might be quite convenient to put it in a bowl of water or in a steamer and to inhale the steam through that. The next particular antiseptic drug which I'm going to talk about is chlorhexidine digluconate. It's a very known and effective antiseptic used in the oral cavity. It's available in the market already as a mouth and throat rinse. It's been licensed by the MHRA and European Medical Agency in Europe. And if you look at the dose here, if you look at the reported antimicrobial spectrum of this particular antiseptic, it's effective against gram-positive, gram-negative, yeast, fungi, and range of viruses. And it's quite powerful because in COVID-19, what we have all recognized now that people are not dying with the virus direct. There are other secondary complications which develops in the severe COVID, which becomes the cause of the death. And in many patients, secondary bacterial infections are one of the key player, which is why you've seen some very positive results from azithromycin and some respiratory antibacterial drugs, which are working in synergism with the other symptomatic relief, because it's body's immune system when it goes down, the patients are at a very high risk of acquiring other viruses. So a combination treatment, a combination antiseptic, which has a wide spectrum antimicrobial coverage, is very interesting, is the key to success here, because in this particular season, we haven't got COVID-19, just SARS-CoV-2 as one of the pathogen. We have got quite a lot of other viruses causing the disease in combination of SARS-CoV-2. Now, a particular brand which everybody is familiar with is Corsidil, and it's a GSK brand, and it's been used by dentists in long period of time. It's very safe, it's effective, it's an approved product, already available in the market, and that particular mouthwash can be repositioned as a throat rinse for this particular activity. It's safe, it's been approved by the regulatory agencies, and we know it could be very effective as a combination treatment in this particular case. Another particular drug I would like to mention today is benzidamine. Benzidamine, interestingly, is also available as a mouth and a throat rinse. It's also a licensed product in European countries, and it has proven analgesic and anti-inflammatory response. Particularly, it's very selective TNF-alpha and interleukin-1 beta inhibitor, and it affects cytokines, anti-inflammatory cytokines, pro-inflammatory cytokines per se, without affecting anti-inflammatory cytokines, which is quite interestingly selective to control the cytokine release in the early stage of COVID, rather than the patient progress to the later stage and you have an overstorm of cytokines causing a severe hyperinflammatory disorder and you need steroid at the end to treat it. So the suggestion is that as soon as you get the COVID positive, as soon as you become symptomatic, you start taking this on to control your cytokine release and manage the symptoms of the disease early on. One of the product which is again available in the EU market is quite interesting is Diflam. This is licensed for pharyngitis in UK and some parts of the Europe, and it's already available as a throat rinse, as a gargle. And the license is for the pharyngitis caused by many conditions, which could be any bacterial or viral pharyngitis. And that's one of the common condition in COVID. So why don't use that particular product, which we already have available on our shelves, and give it to the patients to provide that early anti-inflammatory response that we need for our patients. An alternative for benzodiazepine, if there is a problem with the supply chain or cost is an issue, a cheaper alternative is just like a normal aspirin solution, which can be taken as a throat rinse or a gargle. Dispersible aspirins are common and widely available across the country. They're very cheap, even less than £1. They've got two different forms of aspirin available: 75 milligram dispersible aspirin and 300 milligram high dose dispersible aspirin. What we could potentially suggest to the patient, saying you take a tablet of aspirin, put it in a glass of water, and then you take it as a rinse to rinse your throat, to do the gargle. That could essentially provide a very generic anti-inflammatory property, and it will knock down all the inflammatory responses very easily. Some of the clinicians have also suggested in United Kingdom that if somebody is being COVID positive, they've been suggesting to take aspirin 75 milligram orally anyways to prevent this, coagulopathy and cytokine release syndrome. And there are a couple of references at the bottom of the slide where some of the clinicians and consultants in the UK are talking about including aspirin in the early treatment strategy to make sure that the disease doesn't progress to that stage. However, aspirin 75 is normally being used by elderly people anyways for cardio prevention, and it's also been used as an adjunct in anticoagulant therapy in some patients. Some patients might be taking DOACs and some other form of anticoagulants. So it's important that we do not generalize these instructions for everybody, and we might have to, the pharmacist or the prescriber might have to look at case-to-case basis as to what people are already taking. However, if you suggest this as a throat rinse, then it would be a lot safer than taking 75 milligram orally down the GI tract, because it's only being offered as a local treatment in the throat. So you would not be able to, you could avoid a lot of drug interactions in that case. Interestingly, one of the product I found in the market is a combination of chlorhexidine and benzidamine, and that could be very interesting for those patients where you have got symptoms with the COVID positive results, where you've got cough, you've got the sore throat, and you can feel that the mucosa in the throat or the upper respiratory airways are already inflamed and reacting badly with the virus progressing in there. So this combination product would be quite interesting for those. For those patients where the symptoms are not very strong, maybe antiseptic treatment might work without combining it with benzodiazepine solution. One of the two additional antiseptic I would suggest today are much more safer than chlorhexidine, and they can be ingested by the mouth as well. So what they could do is, if you take a lozenge form of these antiseptic, they could then go further down into the laryngopharynx and provide the sanitization further down the respiratory tract. This could be quite powerful because these lozenges can stay in your mouth for a sustained period of time and could sustain the release of these antiseptics through your throat or laryngopharynx, which could potentiate the treatment strategy quite well. And the safety of these antiseptic would mean that these lozenges can be taken quite frequently, every 3-4 hours, 2 hours, depending on the severity of the symptoms and the disease. And in combination with benzodiazepine throat rinse, in combination with chlorhexidine throat rinse, in combination with the antiviral vapors through the steam, this could really provide a strong synergism. If you look at the clinical literature, and the in vitro evidence for the dichlorobenzyl alcohol and amyl metacresol, it interestingly provides coverage against lots of bacteria, a range of viruses, including SARS-CoV-1. We haven't got, the proof, the concrete evidence for SARS-CoV-2, but it's highly likely, that this particular product would be effective because of its mechanism of action. It's very generic mechanism of action as an antiseptic. So some of the products I could point out from the market is the strepsils, but bear in mind that all these strepsils recipes available across the world are not the same. It's the same brand name, but the constituents vary significantly from one market to another market. There's a major difference in the constituents in strepsils. So one of the combination I've suggested here on my slide is a combination antiseptic strepsils containing dichlorobenzyl alcohol and amyl metacresol. There are some other brands in some other parts of the world which I've managed to find here and put the pictures up on this slide. So it doesn't matter what brand you take. What's important would be to look at the ingredients, what antiseptics that lozenge contains. And these two combination antiseptic lozenges are quite interesting in providing a wide coverage against various pathogens. One of the interesting finding these days you might have come across already is the report in Gastroenterology Journal saying that the virus is making way down to the GI tract by swallowing the saliva, by the sputum going down to the stomach. Now the virus is being transmitted to the gastrointestinal tract, and some patients have got very strong GI symptoms. And that could be another alternative ways to tackle the problem. And we might be able to try activated charcoal or spagola husk, which might have surface absorption properties. Maybe these kind of products could absorb the virus on the surface and allow excretion through the GI tract. Lots of people have got various other symptomatic issues during COVID, and we could provide remedies, over-the-counter remedies for GI spasm. We could provide things for diarrhea, constipation, and we could provide the vitamin and mineral support for boosting immunity as an adjuvant. Paracetamol in combination with ibuprofen to control the high temperatures is also a common practice. We can continue that. If cough is a bit of problem, various range of cough syrups can be offered. Now with the spring coming in, with the sunshine coming in, the allergy seasons kicks in, the hay fever kicks in, and that causes more problems for some people who are hypersensitive, and that causes problems with the immunity response against the virus. So we could combine those patients with antihistamines and anti-allergy treatments. We could supplement nebulizers and inhalers, particularly bronchodilators, for people who are still struggling with the breath and struggling with oxygen saturation. If somebody is with asthma and COPD, we should encourage those to take their preventive inhalers, particularly corticosteroids, to make sure that we prevent any exacerbation of asthma. And if somebody's smoking, it's the time to suggest to stop smoking or try alternative smoking cessation campaigns. So in conclusion, what we are trying to suggest here is, like you sanitize your hand, like you clean your hand and get rid of the virus, is there a way to sanitize your upper respiratory tract? Is there a way to cause oropharyngeal sanitization? The answer is yes. We have got a wide range of antiseptics available, which we can use to sanitize our upper respiratory tract, provide support to the immunity, and allow body to combat this particular virus naturally. The list of early intervention pack, therefore, could include a product for inhalation via steam, a product for throat rinse combining antiseptic with anti-inflammatory property, a combination antiseptic by lozenge, immunity support, bowel regulations, other symptomatic relief. And moving forward, if I look at the balance of probabilities we have, if I look at the antiviral treatments, which we are now investing in and trying to see if there is a blockbuster drug which could help with the answer. If we look at the neutralizing antibody for SARS-CoV-2 under development, all these are potentially very costly treatments and therapeutic agents, which we would not even suggest anyways in the early COVID. We might want to suggest them at moderate to severe COVID. So why not go for an early intervention strategy, which is very cost effective, which is convenient, people can use it at home. All the community pharmacists across the world could be a source for education of patients to provide this treatment support. Most of these drugs, almost all of these, are not prescription only, so they can be supplied without a prescription by a pharmacist. And we can roll out these programs in community setting very easily. The safety of all these drugs would mean that there's no mass public use issues. Like, we had problems with some drugs like anti-malarial drugs where there was problem with cardiac safety. These products and antiseptics are very safe, and we can comfortably allow a mass use by the public for chemoprophylaxis of the disease or treating the COVID-19 in the early stage. The another point I would like to make here, even if the vaccine becomes available, there are known concerns about the potential mutations of the virus. So imagine next year when we get the vaccine in, what if the virus mutates? What if the vaccine is not effective anymore? We might have to develop some viral surveillance programs through WHO, like a flu virus program, and continue sampling the virus strains, continue producing a seasonal vaccination for coronavirus to combat the disease. And that could be the way forward, I think. In my opinion, the one vaccine might not be enough. Coronavirus has infected millions of patients across the world. Now they're going to stay with us. We have to live with this. Our body will find ways to fight with the disease. We won't be able to get rid of it. So potentially this particular therapeutic intervention relies on body's own immune response. It provides an antiviral effect. It provides a symptomatic relief. It gives the body the time, but the real treatment is from the body. It is by the body's immune response, which is why this strategy is very powerful, because it could allow a protection against any future mutations of the virus as well. Moving forward, a clinical trial of this particular therapeutic intervention strategy will provide a solid, concrete evidence whether this strategy really works and how effective it is against a control group. However, looking at the safety, looking at the availability of the products, looking at the urgent need, I think we could suggest this strategy to regulatory bodies or healthcare organizations or public health foundations across the world to adopt this now, even without a clinical trial. But in parallel, I've been discussing with some university hospitals to have a parallel clinical trial kicking off now to make sure that we also start collecting solid scientific evidence. But my recommendation would be that we don't wait for the clinical trial and recommend regulatory bodies to review this strategy, to put this into the agenda and consider this as an early COVID intervention. I'm also looking for partners in different countries to work with us to help with the clinical trial, to allow this global multi-center trial to run, and also talking with some pharmaceutical organizations, pharmaceutical industry, particularly in some parts of the world, to help with the education campaign, to help talking to the regulatory bodies. And some of these companies who are selling these antiseptic products anyways, I'm talking to them if we can reposition the product for COVID, if they can talk to the regulatory bodies, MHRA, EMA, or other relevant organizations in their parts of the world, and allow them to have a marketing authorization to start a campaign and put these products out for people use. So I think that's where I would rest my case and open the forum for questions. And I would be delighted to answer your questions or hear your comments or thoughts, what you have.
Thank you very much, Hamid, for that very interesting presentation of yours. There are many questions, so I'll get right to it. Saima has asked the question in 3 parts. So the question is, all the strategies are symptomatic. So what do you suggest? Wait for the symptoms to appear or start the aggressive protection through these after getting positive COVID-19 results? Similarly, for asymptomatic positive subjects, which combination is sufficient? And then they asked about what about the role of vitamin D?
I think it's a very interesting question. Thank you very much, Simon, for this particular question. And it's very relevant because if you look at the mechanism behind, if you look at the science behind, some products can be used as soon as somebody gets COVID positive result. So if you are even not symptomatic, but if you have COVID positive, if you have contracted the virus, it's advisable to start taking antiseptic treatment straight away. You could take the steam with essential oils. You should be taking chlorhexidine solution. But if you start to develop symptoms, if you feel like you are now feeling the throat, if you are feeling inflammation in your throat, that's where you should quickly start benzodiazepine. You should not stop and wait. You should start the anti-inflammatory treatment as a combination. However, the frequency of use would depend on how symptomatic you are. So maybe if you are asymptomatic, you might not need a very repeated treatment throughout the day. You might just do it once in a day at the bedtime, for example. But if somebody is symptomatic, they might want to repeat the treatment 3 or 4 times a day, depending on their symptoms, and combine it with the lozenges and other treatment as well. If you are not COVID positive, but somebody at your home is COVID positive, now you should start using the treatment, because the chances are you will be picking up the virus. Some patients do not pick a very high load of the virus. They got a very weak immune response. They are asymptomatic throughout the condition and they recover. But some of the early clinical studies are suggesting that their antibodies do not live that long. And some correlation with more stronger the symptoms are, the more symptomatic you are, the more the load of the virus you have contracted, the more antibodies you develop, and long-lasting antibodies in your blood stays. So there are lots of new information coming up. We are constantly learning about this disease. But as a precaution, I think the treatment regimen is so safe that even if you do not have COVID positive, if your household do not have COVID positive, but if you work in a hospital, if your job puts you at risk and you are mixing in the proximity of the people and you have a fear that you might have contracted the virus, you could do it at night at the bedtime. Like you come home, you take a shower. At the same time, you could also do the oropharyngeal sanitization. So if there is a chance that you have contracted, you picked up some particles, you can get rid of them early on. You don't have to wait.
Okay. And to which Timer also has asked, so for the family members of a positive patient, can we start vitamin C and zinc for at least a month?
I think vitamin C and zinc at low doses are very safe for everybody. There are some questions raised in scientific literature about a very high dose formulations. So as far as you do not exceed the recommended daily allowance, I think everybody could potentially use it. Vitamin D you asked about vitamin D earlier as well, and I forgot about that. Vitamin D has been now the evidence has been published, but there are some RCTs saying it doesn't protect you from upper respiratory tract infection. If you go back, a few years ago, if you look at the old clinical evidence, there are some new meta-analysis and trials saying there is some positive effect. Some people going to the extreme saying you must take hundreds of thousands of units of vitamin D every day. You shouldn't. If you live in a country where the vitamin D levels are normally low, taking a supplementation is anyways recommended by all public health agencies. You should be taking vitamin D supplements if you live in a country where the sunshine is a problem, where the vitamin D levels or 25 hydroxy vitamin D is low in your body anyways. You should supplement yourself, but do not take a very high level of vitamin D without consulting your doctors, because it might have a reverse effect. I think that would be my recommendation, if you like. But with the weather changing now, we've got plenty of sunshine, so a mild dose of vitamin D should be good. And if you have got lockdown easing out in your country, if you're allowed to go out for a walk, if you're allowed to go out for an exercise, you should have plenty of exposure to the sunlight, and you could naturally promote conversion of vitamin D3 to active forms of vitamin D. So you shouldn't be overdosing yourself.
Okay. Then Ricky, because we mentioned vitamin C and zinc before, he's asked, do you have any thoughts for oh gosh, I don't know if I can pronounce this, hydroxychloroquine and zinc? Sorry.
It's an interesting question. Hydroxychloroquine is one of the very famous topic in the media, and all politicians love to talk about it. And it's been a long period of discussion about hydroxychloroquine. Go for it, no go for it. The literature, if you look at the scientific evidence, if you look at the clinical literature, the evidence is not solid. And I do appreciate, the problem with the pandemic, the ethical issues concerning about the control groups would mean that you would never going to have a decent control group. But the strong question is that in the absence of a control group, majority of people, like if you go back to early COVID, when people didn't know about hydroxychloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, we knew that the 90% patient recovered anyways. Now, if majority of patients recovered anyways from the infection, and there is a study saying, and a clinical observation saying, 80% of patients recovered with hydroxychloroquine, how would you find out if they're going to recover anyways without taking hydroxychloroquine? If you look at the science behind, if you look at the clinical evidence, it's not really very powerful evidence for chemoprophylaxis. I've not seen any powerful evidence for early COVID or moderate COVID, but there are some interesting suggestions that if you develop a very severe form of COVID, like steroids help at the end stage to ameliorate the hyperinflammatory stage. Similarly, hydroxychloroquine has a very powerful effect at that time when you got the viral pneumonia, when you got the fluid in the lungs. The drug could partition because of its pKa value. It could partition very well to those acidic tissues and provide those anti-inflammatory response in there. It's been used as a disease-modifying agent in rheumatoid arthritis, in lupus erythematosus, and there is some good science behind its anti-inflammatory effect. But the question is when you would get the benefit of the drug, that's not clear. And in our opinion, the evidence we have seen so far, I think the drug has a very good place, maybe at a very severe level of COVID. But do you need that drug then? Then would you not just give away a steroid? Or would you not just use a benzodiazepine like Throtrins or aspirin Throtrins, which is a very good anti-inflammatory, very safe drug to use early on in the COVID and not have a situation to have hydroxychloroquine and put people at risk of cardiac arrest? So I wouldn't really see a merit or a value of that particular drug because you have got other safer alternatives available, much cheaper alternatives available. You could potentially buy a pack of aspirin for less than €1 in most of the European countries. And that could do wonders. You don't need a steroid and you don't need to wait to be hospitalized to start, using therapy, which is why we're saying early intervention is the key here. You don't have to wait to become severely ill. But when the chemoprophylaxis is concerned, I don't think hydroxychloroquine is the way forward.
Francesca has asked, what about carvacrol, Oregon, activities, especially in nanoemulsion, bicaline antiviral properties, and other herbal remedies, both in prevention and therapy?
I think you're right, Francesca. There are, if you really be very open-minded and look in your bag of drugs, you've got about hundreds and thousands of molecules surrounding around you. You might pick on various compounds which has got known antiseptic and antiviral properties. The only question I would ask is that we need to make sure that before making any recommendation for public health, before making any recommendation for public use, we need to make sure that those products are safe to take by inhalation. Because typically you wouldn't want to use it orally. The epicenter for the disease is in the lungs. One of the biggest mistakes, those companies who are trying to put the remdesivir and favipiravir, they are looking at the very later stage of the disease, and they're looking at the oral bioavailability. They're looking at challenges in the GI tract. It's a new drug. We don't know how the drug dissolves in the GI tract. We don't know how those antivirals permeate through GI mucosa. We don't know if there are transporters involved. We don't know if there are efflux transporters involved. We have no evidence about hepatic metabolism. We don't know about bioavailability. We don't know about ADME properties. They're very new drugs, and we are not targeting the lungs, which might be one of the reasons why those antiviral drugs are working perfectly fine on in vitro. You can see brilliant effect on the Petri dishes, but when it comes to the in vivo, you don't see that effect. You don't see, the mortality rate going down with those diseases. So one of the good news is now that one of the companies trying to use one of the antiviral drug as inhalation, which might do wonder, which might provide that local effect in the airways. And I think that could be very promising for severely ill COVID patients. Again, that would be very costly treatment. That would be useful for selective group of patients. So my recommendation would be, again, to look at an early intervention, try to knock it down early on so we don't need those expensive therapies, we don't need hospitalization, and use the safer ones. So you're right, some other products are there, some other antiseptic materials are there, which could be equally effective, if not more, but are they safe? So what I've done, I've taken a safer approach and only recommended those which are safe, which I know have been used for donkeys of years. and I know they can be taken by inhalation as safe. Something are safe to put on skin, but they might not be safe to inhale it. So which is why I've been very conservative in picking that list up.
Okay. Then May Florence asked, can we only use activated charcoal, or is Fagula husk for bowel regulation?
Not at all. You've got plenty of other products for bowel regulation. If you look at my slide, this contains lactulose, you have got Movicol, you have got Senocot, you've got plenty of things around. You've got some pharmacological treatments as well to directly affect the motility of the GI tract. So you've got plenty of things. The reason I've suggested the activated charcoal and Spagola was because these two products have got an interesting property that they have a very high surface area, particularly activated charcoal. Activated charcoal is used as a detox agent if somebody overdoses the drug. If somebody is trying to overdose it and kill themselves, this is one of the approved regimen we give to the patient. And what activated charcoal does, it absorbed the chemicals and the poisons from the GI tract, and then allows it to excrete out in the respiratory tract. And there has been some theories published many years ago about cleaning the colonic pathogens or short chain fatty acids or the byproducts of colonic imbalance. If you've got, the microflora has been disbalanced in your colonic region, people have tried to use fiber like Spagola husk or activated charcoal to cleanse your gut. So this is why I was suggesting, saying maybe because of their surface properties, maybe because of their ability to absorb things on the surface, it might be able to absorb the virus in the GI tract and allow you a clearance from the GI tract as well. So it's not only just to regulate the bowel, it's not only just to symptomatically treat the bowel symptoms, but also to help to clear the virus off. So anything which can swell in water, anything like Spagola, which have got this 10, 20 times swelling property, which can be a bulk forming laxative, can be very powerful to clear the virus off.
Okay, thank you. Then Zira has asked, how can we use the antimicrobial essential oils in indoor settings like healthcare, clinic, commercial centres, offices, and any other places where many people gather? And then they also asked, are there any allergies possible with the use of essential oils?
Very interesting question. I think we might not be able to put this forward as a mass use in a place of gathering. But what you would like to do is use it as a personalized approach at your home settings. You could use it in clinics, you could use it in hospital settings, you can use it in any institution, but there's no need. If you can do it at home, you don't need to do it in public, you don't need to go onto the clinical settings to do it. It's much safer to do it at home. Particularly, all these nebulization techniques are potentially viral particle generating techniques. When you inhale in and inhale out, inhale, exhale in an environment where the steam is evaporating out, you want to put a towel across. You don't want other people to then start inhaling the contaminated steam from your body. So I don't think it's recommended to use it in public. You would like to confine it yourself. With regards to the question on allergy, I think it's a very good question. Some people might be allergic to some of the constituents of the oils. So you might want to run a test and make sure that you are not allergic. Some people might have only a mild allergic response, like just a bit of cough or not being able to tolerate it. So what you could do is put just one drop of each oil and do not add it onto the water directly, because I've tried it myself. If you put it directly on the water, the boiling point is too low, you will just get a burst release of vapors and you won't be able to tolerate it at all. So what you would like is to put it on the vicinity or absorb it on a filter paper or something and put it down. Or if you're using a steamer or a facial steamer, you put it on the vicinity, not put it in the water reservoir. So when the steam will make it its way through, the vapors will come very slowly. One of the other easiest and cheapest strategies use the vapor ups, because vapor up has got this paraffin as a base, and paraffin is water insoluble, so it provides you a sustained release mechanism built in. Just put the vapor up balm in there, and then take a slow release effect through that, or put a small quantity. After 5 minutes, put another small quantity. So you try to avoid a burst release. And if one of the particular out of the 6 essential oil cause you a trouble or cause you an allergic reaction, you could remove that off, because a reduced recipe will also have an effect. And only steam, if you cannot tolerate essential oils at all, only the steam could also provide you symptomatic relief. It would mobilize your mucus. It would provide the heat attenuation of the pathogens in the respiratory tract. So it's still powerful. So do not just give up because you cannot tolerate it or you are allergic. Try to reduce the recipe down. Try to narrow down the list, or maybe just use steam only.
Okay, thank you. Then Dr. Kavita Bermani has asked 3 questions, so I'll list them for you. So the first one was chemokines and cytokinesis other than kidneys could be involved, and they could act also after lining blockade. Then, do you want to answer that one first?
I'm not sure I've understood the question properly, but if
I
the
think
question
it's more like a statement than a question.
Yeah, go on. You
Then,
complete the question first, maybe I might get a perspective when you complete the question.
Then there's like those who are asymptomatic, what precautions should be taken by them?
I think the asymptomatic one I've already mentioned in response to previous question. Now, I'm not sure if I've understood the question properly, but if you were talking about cytokines, chemokines, and other inflammatory processes kicked on at the cellular level, you're right. There's a combination of things. Cytokines are picked up in particular because in severely ill patient, cytokine release syndrome was one of the reasons for people's death. The respiratory coagulopathy was another major reason for the death in COVID. So, which is why we were talking about cytokines quite a lot. But the anti-inflammatory drug we are taking is quite generic. It would provide not only cytokine and chemokine shutting down. The aspirin would shut down arachidonic acid pathway. It would shut down, LOX and COX pathway. So you're going to get a wide coverage in there, particularly if you combine ibuprofen as well. Say if somebody is very symptomatic, a very high grade temperature, and say 3 or 4 times paracetamol a day is not enough. So you don't want to overdose with paracetamol. You got to combine ibuprofen in there. And ibuprofen not only just support the temperature, it's a very strong anti-inflammatory drug. So you're going to get some anti-inflammatory response from ibuprofen. You got aspirin as a throat rinse. You got benzodiazepine, which is a very selective inhibitor. So I think that would be the good. It would do wonder, in many patients. Although I haven't got the proper clinical trial done, but many people have trialed this treatment, and I've got very good clinical observation from across the world. Many doctors who have trialed this in their patients. And then there many people have benefited from the strategies already.
Okay. Anwar has put 2 points has to be mentioned. All these interventions are not evidence-based and could be in value, in my opinion, as professional pharmacists. So the 2 points are all these interventions are not evidence-based and they could be of value in certain populations, particularly high risk and comorbid patients.
It's a very good question, and many people do ask that. And my response would be saying, look, if you are going to wait for the full evidence, now look at the remdesivir, look at the compassionate use license given by regulatory agencies for antiviral drugs. You've got liponavir, ritonavir being used without any evidence. You have got the new antiviral drugs where you've got all the toxicological safety trials missing, but you are trying to expedite. When you are in an emergency medical condition, what is more important is to look at the evidence. If there is some evidence there, so I wouldn't say that the strategies I am suggesting are not evidence-based at all. There is a very good evidence. But do you have an RCT? No, we do not have an RCT. But do we need an RCT? That's the question I would ask. So it's a risk versus benefit kind of analysis you need to do. And the safety in the patients you might need to look at. And if the strategies being proposed are safe, one, if the risk is very minimum, if the benefit is higher, if there is a good evidence to support the science, why not use it? Now have a look at Diflam. Diflam is already licensed for pharyngitis. Now pharyngitis is not a disease, it's a symptom. It's caused by coronavirus, it's caused by influenza virus, it's caused by many bacteria. So the product is already licensed. There are already clinical trials to support that. Why don't we use it? Aspirin, we already know, many clinical trials, many evidence. Similarly, chlorhexidine, wide spectrum antibacterial effect known. Essential oils, we already have the evidence. We have got Spanish flu, we have got the history, and it's safe. So I don't think we are suggesting anything dangerous here. I don't think we are talking without science. I don't think we are suggesting remedies which have no evidence at all. There is a good evidence to believe. And in a health emergency, in an emergency like this, I think it's a good reason to put this forward. I give you an example, like United Kingdom never used dexamethasone, the steroid, in the severe COVID patients. Now, our death rates of the COVID were very high compared to some countries like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Belgium. They all had steroids in the severe COVID as part of their standard care. Now, was there any RCT for COVID-19, for SARS-CoV-2? There was no RCT, but some countries recognize the science behind a steroid to treat a hyperinflammatory stage in some diseases. And they thought that it's a good science to allow using steroid at that stage. And they benefited with a very low mortality rate in those countries. UK waited for the evidence. They got the evidence now in June, and they've included that into their treatment regimen. But you could have saved thousands of patients' life if you would have adopted this early on in March, in April, because you had the science, you had the clinical evidence available. So I'm not saying that RCTs are not good. RCTs are brilliant. You know, they provide you the concrete, solid data, which is why I'm also kicking off some clinical trials of this strategy. However, you do not want to risk people's life for the sake of RCTs. If the benefit is very clear and it's very safe, I think we should go ahead and start suggesting this to public health agencies to consider it in their review.
Okay, thank you. And one last question, but there are very many questions. People are really contributing. Would you agree to answer them maybe by email, and we'll put them on the website? Would that be okay?
Yeah, it would be absolutely fine if there's a discussion forum online, so you could post it up there and I could start responding them.
Okay.
And maybe if some other people have got similar questions, so they could also see the response and questions on that web forum, so everybody could benefit.
Okay, great, thank you. So the last question is, how about consuming immunostimulator to strengthen the immune system? Would it instead make a patient later on enter the cytokine storm phase faster?
I think when we talk about immunostimulant, there are a wide variation of the ways people do it. Some ways are quite potentially risky and unsafe. For example, you can stimulate immune system by subjecting your body to a dead bacteria, a part of bacteria, a pathogenic organism. Your immune systems, your immune response can be hyper potentiated by an allergen. You could use some potentially toxic plant-based materials which could kick on an immune response. So you could do that, but how effective that immunity would be, would that be of any use against SARS-CoV-2? That is a question we need to ask. So rather than stimulating immune system in a wrong way and using your immune resources to produce things which you might not need, I think what you might want is supplements which supports immune system in generic way, like vitamin D, like vitamin C, like folic acid, like zinc. These are the building blocks which helps immune system to produce whatever it needs to fight against an invading organism. So I think supporting immune system is a good thing, but we should be very careful about taking any immune stimulant because we don't know, what you're trying to do here. And overreaction of immune system causes the severe form of cytokine release syndrome. It's a high response from the body which is causing us death, which is causing the organ failure. It's not the virus which is killing us. It's our own body's response which is trying to kill us. The same thing happens in metastasis in a cancer tissue. When your own body's cells and your own body's response try to not balance the system. If you look at Alzheimer's disease, what happens? You have pro-inflammation, you have anti-inflammation. Your body has two ways. And when pro-inflammatory markers goes up and your anti-inflammatory system is not kicking in to balance this out, now you have a hyper-inflammatory state, causes all sorts of problems. I don't think you want to do that.
Okay, Well, thank you very much. There are still many questions, like I said, will be answered in written form. Thank you very much for your time. It was a really interesting presentation. Matef.
Most welcome. I
Yes.
would like to thank the organizers. I would like to thank the MDPI. I would like to thank all the audience who took out time and came to this presentation. And thank you very much, everybody. And thank you very much for asking all these questions, because these questions means a lot. This helps to understand, and this scientific dialogue and questioning helps to understand the message and philosophy behind. So I'm very thankful. And if you would like to help further, if you like to get involved in the education campaign or help with the clinical trial or work to launch the products in your regulatory bodies, please do contact. We are looking for partners. This is a public cause, and we are doing this without any commercial insights or interest. The pharmaceutical companies we are providing consultancy and support is all free of cost. We're not charging anything. This is a public cause, and we should come together, unite ourselves to help the people.
Okay, so also from my side, thank you so much again, Hamid. This was indeed a very insightful and interesting presentation and Q&A session. And we will continue this at a later stage. And I would like to say that the webinar has been recorded and will be uploaded to this website too in a couple of days. And finally, and you can see it in the background, I would like to tell you that we will run a stream on COVID-19 during the coming virtual World Sustainability Forum to be held in September. We will send you details how to submit abstracts, etc. And also, if you would like a certificate for this webinar, please send us a mail to the address you have received from the invitation. And Hamid, really, thank you very much. It was great.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, all of you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye, and have
Bye-bye.
a nice day, and keep safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Same to you guys.